The reason I'm here is a number of months back, got an email from Kenny saying, would you? And the answer was, yes, what's the question? And it's an honor to be here with Kenny, who is beloved to me, still to my former congregation in Westchester, and I know now to all of you and to this Los Angeles Jewish community. I look around the room this morning and I see lots of wonderful colleagues, some of whom I know for literally my whole life. A few of you I know for a number of years, and the rest of you I hope to get to know today and to build on that connection in the coming weeks and months. It's always an awesome time of year. You know, I spent 30 years in the congregational rabbinate, and Rosh Chodesh Elul is always that moment that kind of starts to shake the entire foundation of your being. People have said, you know, well, why they get a guy like you to come? Because you don't even have a congregation. You're not even sweating bullets like the rest of us. The answer is I actually will be leading high holiday services, not in the congregations that I had the privilege to lead as their rabbi, but I'll be once again for the second year in a row at Brown University Hillel in Providence, Rhode Island. So the sweat and the shaking of the foundations never goes away. So a lot of people would talk about the vengeful God of soccer wreaking havoc on our Jewish world. I want to talk about, just in an opening sentence, about the vengeful God of the 405. I mean, we could talk about great Talmudic texts, we could talk about liturgical texts, I'm sure we'll talk about all the big issues, but I mean, it is really debilitating, this thing that's going on, right, like the artery in the middle. But somehow all of you knew all the inside, you know, baseball. Me, I got up, you know, at 1 a.m. just to make sure I'd be here on time. And glad that I could be here. I want to start, before I give you a textual frame for this first keynote, I just want to give you, to me, the refrain of lots and lots of my days in this holy work that we get to do together. I don't know, does anybody remember, there used to be a mayor in New York City, guy's name was Ed Koch. Anybody remember Ed Koch? Also a blessed memory, passed away this year. Ed Koch was not just a mayor, he was a larger-than-life presence. And it turned out that, when I was dating my wife, she worked for Ed Koch. And the only way I could take her out on a date was I had to meet her at a Koch speaking event somewhere in New York City. So to say that I heard Ed Koch give a talk or two would be an understatement, because I was always trying to figure out ways to take my then girlfriend out on dates. So I heard him a million times ask his very, very signature question. What is his signature question that Ed Koch would ask it? How am I doing? So what I want to tell you is that depending on where and when he asked that question, the answer was actually not predictable. In the middle of Staten Island, when the borough of Staten Island was being underserved, when he asked, how am I doing, he didn't hear cheers. There were times when people did shout out all the wonderful things he was doing. But what I most admired about Ed Koch is that he actually had the intestinal fortitude every day to want to really hold up the mirror and know how he was doing, how his leadership was impacting the people, how the ideals that, again, he would make a hallmark of his mayoral leadership were being realized. I want to challenge all of us in the month of Elul and the coming year and the coming years to have the courage to ask, how are we doing? And I don't mean that just in, kind of, hi, how are you? The kind of thing that this nice guy said to me at the supermarket in Northern California where I was just a couple of days ago. You guys are so good at that. And by the way, I grew up in Southern California. Grew up in Orange County. Karen Fox was one of the counselors when we used to spend our, retreat weekends at Hess Kramer. So I get that how are you doing can be like a nice little nicety. But how am I doing in the deeper sense? How are institutions doing? How is Jewish life and the things that we've committed our lives to lead. How are we honestly doing? Not the things we tell ourselves sometimes to get up out of bed in the morning, but the truth. And these are days of truth. So I hope this morning and then again this afternoon to hold up the mirror to all of us. And again, it's not personal, it's communal. And this is one of those great dramatic moments where we need to really tell the truth. And there's lots of great truth that will, make us smile and give us a sense of hope. And there are other things that literally are staring at us saying, don't just notice, but notice and reframe. Notice and respond. Notice and change. And those are the things I hope that we will dig deeply into. So I want to start with, for me, the frame for this first keynote, which is to me the frame of the Yamim Noraim, and frankly, I think the frame for how I try to look at Jewish life. And they're just three Hebrew words, and you know the words from the liturgy. Hayom Harat Olam. Okay? So on one level, they're simple words, and they're from our liturgy. Wherever in our different liturgical practices we find those in the liturgy, in almost all of our liturgical traditions, those are cornerstone words. And I think it's one of those places where, for me, for lots of years, there's those words that you kind of just sort of, you nod to and then you move on and find the real substance. But I want to just linger for a few moments on each of the three words. Hayom. Hayom, it's so simple. It's today, it's now, this moment. It's not etmol, it's not machar. It's where is this moment? And this moment now will be, in a moment, the past, is getting ourselves into that sense that we are at one of the most unique moments in all of Jewish history. And I know that's been said at many juncture points before, but I think we can't minimize that is exactly where we are today. So that presentness, that ability to be in this moment and to have that mirror in front of us and around us to see this moment with clear eyes. Harat. In lots of the liturgical translations, it's referred to as birth, right? This is the day of the world's birth is often the simple and maybe pshat and maybe wrong translation. We know harat, we know the word, we know it from the Hebrew. Harayon, pregnancy. It's a moment that's pregnant with possibility, but it's also all these things, but it's all those things before birth. It's actually really not about this is the day the world is born. And for me, the translation that gets inside this moment most powerfully is conception. And not to have a debate about when, liturgical life starts. But conception, conceiving, that to me is Hayom Harat Olam. What is the way we conceive of Jewish life? And is our way of conceiving of Jewish life, frankly, the way it is or the way it ought to be? The last word of the three is also potentially a throwaway, Olam. Right? Anybody who's survived Hebrew school could give you probably Olam in translation, and it means world. But it also can have that, that sense of eternity, right? Le'olam va'ed, right? The thing that goes on. And obviously, they're all interconnected. But what is it that is of Hayom that we can conceive of, that we can reconceptualize, that will make sure that we've planted things that will actually continue and continue on and on, le'olam. So a world is reconceived when, now, today, this moment. And when we do that reconceptualization, I think we are at one of the most remarkable moments, potentially, in our long history. A couple of just tool frames. Marty Linsky and Ron Heifetz have written a number of books about change. And really want to get inside kind of how are we in this moment of Hayom, and how is it that we're going to reconceptualize it, and on what level are we going to do that reconceptualization? So Marty Linsky and Ron Heifetz, who've been teaching at the Kennedy School at Harvard and have been doing lots of teaching for the Jewish community especially about reframes of of not just liturgy, but of leadership, makes a distinction between technical and adaptive change. So technical change is, it's sort of mundane. Technical change would be if in our congregations we were saying, you know, we got to just find a better way to put out our bulletin, right? Our bulletin, it just, you know, looks kind of, it's just kind of scattered with lots of different font sizes. It's cluttered. It doesn't have the right information. So, you know, can we get together and have a thought about, you know, our bulletin? That would be a technical thing. And by the way, you may be worrying about that very problem in your own congregation. But an adaptive challenge about that moment would be to say, why do we have bulletins? Is that how we should be communicating? Is that the way that we, you know, connect with our communities? Or there's another reframe about how we are relating. And what are all the different ways that we could relate, right? So the technical needs a bunch of specific things, and we all have technical things we've got to do today, and we'll have to do a number of them tomorrow. But to reconceptualize Jewish life is not a technical challenge, it's an adaptive challenge. Just to put it in a healthcare frame for people, if you get a sore throat that turns out to be strep, there's a technical solution, right? Unless you're allergic to penicillin, you find another antibiotic. You simply have to take the pill. You don't have to learn to meditate. You don't have to change your diet. You don't have to you know, do anything radical other than get some water, take the pill, put it in your body, and it will do the work that needs to be done. But if one has serious coronary disease, even bypass surgery, even medication is actually not going to give you health. It requires literally you change your life, your everything. What you do, how you think, how you spend your time, every dimension is called into question. I'd like to suggest that the reconceptualization, Hayom Harat Olam, is about the adaptive change. It's about literally needing to rethink the everything that we do that gives us our communal life and our communal health in service of really anchoring ourselves in a kind of Jewish life and health that will take us for the foreseeable future and le'olam and beyond. So we've got adaptive and technical challenges, and by the way, I don't think we're going to have any conversation today about technical challenges. There'll be other opportunities, but this is too big a moment, so let's just stay in the big adaptive ones. So one of the things that's pretty obvious to, I'm sure, all of us is that we are living at a time when there are more Jews outside of our walls than inside. Those walls could be defined as congregations, and it's true for congregations. By the way, I was just in Sonoma County, up in Northern California. The affiliation rate in Sonoma County is between 10 and 12%. Just staggering, just staggering. I thought I hit the bottom when I was in South Florida earlier this year, and the colleagues shared that 15% affiliation rate defines South Florida. But Northern California may, in fact, win that prize. And you don't really want to win that prize, do you? So the question is, where are those walls? Those walls are, by the way, Federation walls. Those walls are JCC walls. They're Hillel walls. They're pretty much every institution's walls. There are more Jews outside than inside. So if we spend the bulk of our time only thinking about how we nourish the great people who we see every day or twice a year, whatever it is, we will be missing the lion's share of the Jewish people who are living and breathing and potentially a part of who we are at this moment. So that's one of those adaptive changes. That's one of those adaptive challenges. What do we do about that reality? It is, frankly, a fact, but a fact isn't a solution. So I want to just poke inside of what we think about those Jews outside the walls, because I think it informs lots of what we do and don't do. When we kind of get inside, who do I think they are, right? And what I want to suggest, I want to just look at one frame first from the Pew study that was released this past October. It's the study of the nuns, right? And we talk about the N-O-N-E-S, nuns. I was with Sister Simone Campbell a few weeks ago for the launch of the Nuns on the Bus tour. And of course, there was an opportunity to think about the nuns, and these are the most inspiring religious leaders you could ever meet. But I'm talking about those who have, when asked, no religious affiliation connection. And that number has been a pretty small number in the evolving history of North American religious life. And it's been studied by people like Robert Putnam of Harvard, who in his book with David Campbell, American Grace, gets inside this reality. And the nun study released by Pew also gets inside who are those people who say they have no religious affiliation or connection. And first of all, how many are there? The first studies in the late 50s, 1958, suggested that only about 3% of Americans define themselves as none of the above, right? You give them all the different religious possibilities, again, across all religious lines, and only 3% in 1958 would say, those categories don't work, I'm not with them, I have a different path. But over the past years, going to 2008, 2009, that number grows dramatically. 2008, 2009, we see numbers like 17% of North Americans, when asked about their religious affiliation, put down none. And then we see a particular demographic among the nuns that have a staggeringly higher rate, and that would be 20s and 30s. So among 20s and 30s, you have potentially between 30 and 40% who define their connection or disconnection as none of the above. Okay? Between 30 and 40%. So that's literally a showstopper. Now you probably know all that, and you probably know much of what I'm about to say, but let me just underline a few of the points. When you go and look at what they actually believe and don't believe, there's a lot of how am I doing that we got to hold up. It's not, again, we may want to tell ourselves, those people who don't come, who don't contribute, who don't sit in those pews, who don't come to our classes, that they have no feeling and no responsibility and no possibility. But it turns out when you look at what the graphs tell us, you find out that many, if not most, of the nuns have some spiritual sensibility. A whole lot of them have a belief in God. A whole lot of them actually think about spiritual practice and spiritual questions. Where they absolutely disconnect is they don't identify much, if any of that, with organized religious institutions, okay? And when you ask them about their disconnect from religious institutions, 70% of nuns say that religious institutions are, quoting, focused too much on money, power, and too mixed up in politics, okay? So I think there's a lot there. And I think if we want to tell ourselves, you know, that the righteous few are gathered inside of our institutions, whether they be federations, Hillels, JCCs, synagogues, and again, I don't lump them together because I view them all as equally important. I think I put them together because I think they're experiencing the same change forces. If we think that we're dealing with the people who really care the most, and those who care the least are all the ones outside, we're not going to bother very much to get outside the walls of our congregations, because again, we got the people we most need inside. And by the way, many of the people who are outside used to be inside. Some for only a few minutes, some for a few years, some for the life of their B'nai Mitzvah aged children. Some have literally scars to tell you about, and again, we've all heard those scars about what their experiences have and have not been. Some of them had fabulous experiences, but they just don't see that as something that has to go on le'olam. So I tell you that because I think this notion of who's outside and who's inside is complicated. And I think if we begin to get ourselves much clearer about who's outside, and I'm not suggesting for one moment we forget about the nice people who every day literally commit lives to strengthening our institutions. But I would hate to imagine that they're going to be part of the last generation of thinking about those questions. So let me stay on this theme and just bring you, again, don't bring New York to California, but I want to bring, would it be okay if I just had one moment to bring New York to California? Because by the way, in New York, people just have such an attitude about all of you. I mean, I don't know if you, and by the way, they include me in that because they feel like, even though I've been there for over 30 years, I must be really Californian. And I wear that proudly. So I went to get a Starbucks coffee in Northern California. I won't tell you exactly where because it probably could have been in any number of places. And I got online, I got up to the counter, and the guy asked me what I wanted. And I'm a pretty straight ahead guy. I don't have that kind of quichoisie, foo-foo, you know, kind of stuff that people order. I just said a tall black coffee. Well, the nice guy at Starbucks went into this like Tai Chi thing. He was moving so intentionally. This was so beautiful to watch. And you know, he was moving over to find the cup, and he got the cup. And then he brought that cup over and kind of was moving between the dark roast and the medium roast. And I'm watching, I'm thinking, oh my God, I actually have to be somewhere tomorrow. I'm thinking, okay, Rick, just check that New York thing. You don't have to get so worked up about this. Then finally, he's still in this, you know, Tai Chi mode. And I said, excuse me, can I buy you a cup of coffee? So, you know, I want to be careful that what I'm about to bring you is New York. And sometimes, by the way, New Yorkers just like relax for a minute. And maybe you want the decaf, Rick, right? So what I want to bring you from New York is not the agitation and what we have on the subways every day. Because, by the way, sitting on the 405, I felt a lot of that very same thing today. But there was a demographic study this past fall that was released. Two wonderful, I would say, exemplary demographers, Stephen Cohen and Jack Euclides. And they studied New York. Again, New York isn't like everywhere. You would say, thank God. I would say, that's just the fact. And they wanted to notice demographic trends. And again, the density of Orthodox Jews in New York is just literally, other than Jerusalem, there's really not much that's equivalent. And what they found is the following, and you maybe looked at it because it may be a bit of a canary in the coal mine, or it may just be New York. But what they saw was some diminishing numbers, not across the board. Which groups saw basically a reduction in their overall numbers? Two groups in particular. One called the Reform Movement, the other called the Conservative Movement. Right? The Reform Movement and the Conservative Movement each lost 40,000 people, and that includes New York City and some of the surrounding suburban communities as well. And you have to know that the response to that demographic, and by the way, our community, if they only would read sacred text the way they read demographic studies. I mean, this by the way, was Torah Sinai because it was a demographic study, so it's obviously true. And I'm not suggesting methodological errors to Stephen Cohen or to Jack Euclides, but I actually don't conclude anything from that survey. Now, is it I just ignore it? No, I actually think they told us something factual, that 40,000 less Jews found themselves inside of synagogues in a kind of half decade that they're watching some of these trends continue. But I actually don't think from that we should conclude, well, the last person out, please turn out the lights. And that was easily what went quickly through the community in analyzing this. And by the way, particularly to the Reform and Conservative movement, basically, you might want to start looking for other modes of employment, because clearly this thing is just going to continue on the downward tread. But if we don't pay attention to those trends and actually, as I said with the nuns, understand what is it that's actually going on, then I think we're going to be not simply surprised, I think we're going to be unprepared for the adaptive change that is going on. And again, I'd like to know those 40,000 individuals. I want to know what was going on in that decision. I don't want to conclude that our movements are literally on the edge of life itself. Another little frame that I find helpful, the word unaffiliated is, I think, a flawed term. Unaffiliated. That means it's their problem, right? Uninspired means it's our problem, right? Who are the uninspired? Well, I meet them all the time. I sit on airplanes. I was on a plane, and I got a guy who was telling me about, sometimes when they find out you're a rabbi, do you ever let people know that you're a rabbi there? Well, I'm on a plane pretty much every day, and, you get the uninspired, they got lots to tell us. And some of it is common one to the other, but some of it actually, it needs to be both heard and responded to. But uninspired means it's our communal failures in some of the ways. Again, how am I doing, Ed Koch? Where's that mirror? Again, not to suggest that everything that challenges us is a flaw, but where is that spark of inspiration that literally brought all of us to this work? Otherwise, we wouldn't be sitting here this morning sweating bullets over sermons and leadership if we had not had a spark kindled. And how communally are we going to do that? And how much of our communal life is filled with that kind of inspiration? How much of it is filled with lots of bureaucracy? So now I want to get to my main positive point. Those were analyses. You can surely find them from others. But those are, to me, frameworks of that mirror to think about who's outside, who's inside. Now I want to think about who are we. And I want to look around this room. And I want to think about what it means, denominations, movements, peoplehood. And the frame for me is unity and diversity. So a lot of people have kind of told us that, the movements are pretty much also on their way, not just some synagogues, but the movements. And we're in a post-denominational, post-movement world. That's above my pay grade. Obviously, I'm not going to comment that I know where everything is going. But I actually think that the moment that we're living in, Hayom, is that the movement may not be the most important thing to most of the folks that we need to lead. Doesn't mean our movements aren't doing important work. Doesn't mean that there's not uniqueness in each of the expressions. But the brand loyalty is not what animates Jewish life or what disconnects people from Jewish life. People are looking for what is real, what is deep, what is nourishing. And when that's found by a Chabad rabbi, then that's where they're going to find it. If it's in a Reformed congregation, a Reconstructionist, unaffiliated congregation, people want the real living embers of the tradition. And I think they're going to turn to the places that have it most intensely. And I particularly believe that's found across the spectrum. That is not the possession of the Reform movement. It is certainly not the possession of Orthodoxy. It is all of our possession if we do our work the way I know all of us would like to do it. So I want to give you an image about how I think about our unity and our diversity. And it's a mashal shehaya. This is a real story that I think has application for all of us. So in my former congregation, we actually lived in a very pluralistic neighborhood with several Orthodox synagogues and several Reform and Reconstructionists and conservative. It's really a wonderful little Medina, a lot like the worlds that you get to lead in. And it was about 13 years ago, and my Chevruta, who was the rabbi of Young Israel of Scarsdale, Rabbi Jake Rubenstein of blessed memory, one of the true giants, I think, of the rabbinate. He called me up Erev Rosh Hashanah. I mean, Erev, the day of. And I'm thinking, what are you doing? You show off. You got everything done. You don't have more important things to be sweating. You can call me up. Jake, what are you calling me about? He said, Rick, I did it. I said, I am so glad you did it. but what did you do? He said, I did it. I convinced, finally, after months and months of negotiation, I convinced my Orthodox rabbinic colleagues to change the course, change the route of the Eruv in our community. And I'm thinking to myself, this may go in the category of earth-shattering Jewish things that a Reform rabbi needs to know. But right off the bat, it didn't exactly, resonate as to why this had to be brought to my attention Erev Rosh Hashanah. It could have been fine right afterwards. But he said, I convinced them. I said, well, how'd that work out? He said, well, I convinced them to include Westchester Reformed Temple within the Eruv. I said, you did what? He said, yeah, I convinced them. And I said, how'd you do that? He said, well, I told them that I wanted it to be easy for our community to share joy and sadness with our friends at Westchester Reformed Temple. And for that, we ought to include them in the Eruv. And he got plenty of pushback. People said, those people in the Eruv, are you kidding? They're not in the Eruv of Jewish life. I mean, what they do, he said, I'm not talking about anything other than we are a community, and we are in deep relationship. Rabbi Rubenstein came to my older son's bar mitzvah Shabbos afternoon with his own son. It was easier for him to do it with the Eruv. I want to suggest that the Eruv we've drawn is not in the right place. And by the way, that Eruv, and again, I'm sure there are Eruvim that we need to redraw the lines. But can I tell you that the bigger takeaway from a Reform rabbi's point of view about the changing of the path of the Eruv? I told a number of our longtime members, I was so enthusiastic when I went to shul, Erev Rosh Hashanah, I told some people, I didn't make it a whole sermonic thing until a little bit later, but I told some people, and I was so excited, and it was almost bringing tears. And this wonderful past leader said, Rick, who cares? That's the most anachronistic, ridiculous relic of medieval Judaism that has no place in modernity. I said, do you understand? Do you understand what Rabbi Rubenstein did? Do you understand the power? I said, what have we done to express that much commitment to Klal Yisrael ever, let alone recently? What he has done is included you and me and everything we are and everything we do within the circle of his Jewish life. That is earth-shattering. And I said more long-windedly, later homiletically, what do we do in our rabbinates that redraw that line and that make a circle that includes those that otherwise we would keep out? Now, just by being in this room today, we've already drawn the Eruv. And maybe it itself, by the way, in many of our large North American communities, the Eruv does not include all of our Rabbanim. And again, it's not necessarily even what we want, but there are people who feel outside. I mean, are there times we can draw that wider circle and include? It doesn't mean we have to agree. It doesn't mean we have to be literally aligned in all matters of ritual policy or Israel commitments. But can we draw a wider circle around our Jewish worlds? And what does it take to do that in our congregations? And what does it take to do that in our movements, in our responsible leadership of the Jewish people, end of the day? I mean, are we not part of something much, much larger than any of our synagogues and than any of our movements? Are we not part of the Jewish people, past, present, and future? And is that not ultimately what could inspire and give us the strength that we need? So I want to continue, if I could, to get now, after I drove the Eruv pretty wide, I want to get into some of the hard places where that Eruv tends to get, snapped, and we lose that sense. So I'm going to talk this morning for a few minutes now, and I'll talk more this afternoon about Israel. Because I think every year there's something to say. I actually think this one is about the Eruv. It's about where we draw the circle for Jewish life. And what's happening in Israel is a tipping point of opportunity. So I look around the room, there are people in this room who have been leaders of redrawing the communal eruv when it comes to pluralism in Israel. And I not only applaud, but I admire and I learn from your leadership. I want to suggest that there's a litany, and we're at a really tough moment right now, and it may not go where we hope it will go, not to presume I know what everybody feels. So you know the narrative of Women of the Wall coming up on 25 years. You know that this fall. And there will be celebrations in Israel, as there should be. You also know the litany of this past year. Since we last gathered for Yomim Noraim, Rosh Chodesh Cheshvan is one of those seminal dates as we tell time. And on Rosh Chodesh Cheshvan, we all know, but let me just rehearse it for the sake of drawing the dots forward. On Rosh Chodesh Cheshvan, Anat Hoffman, who not only is the chairwoman of Women of the Wall, but also the leader of the Israel Religious Action Center in Jerusalem, which is a social justice arm of the Israel Movement for Progressive Judaism. She was praying at the Kotel, wearing a talit, and she had the audacity to pray the Shema out loud. She wasn't given a summons. She wasn't asked to kind of tone it down. She was arrested. She was put in jail. You know the story. She was treated harshly. She slept on the floor, was in a jail cell with a prostitute and a car thief. And frankly, we could ask whether prostitutes and car thieves should spend nights the way she spent the night. But she was treated very harshly. The next morning, the word began to spread. And I know that I was on the phone with David Saperstein and Michael Oren. Literally, by the time breakfast was served in our neck of the woods, we were already saying something has gone terribly wrong. So what is the response? And of course, the response was, first we have to see about the police. Did they do what they're supposed to do? And then we said, okay, well, let's do that, but let's also ask the question: what's happened to the project of the Jewish people that many of us have committed our lives to, called the State of Israel? What has gone wrong? So if you connect the dots from Rosh Chodesh Cheshvan and you go forward, around Rosh Chodesh Kislev, the tension was starting to really build. And for the first time, I think ever, the Prime Minister of Israel became aware of what was happening at the Kotel and what was happening around the Jewish world in response. And it became a strategic, not a pluralist issue, a strategic issue for the well-being of the State of Israel, to the point where, you know the story, Natan Sharansky brought in to the Prime Minister and he said, fix it. Respond in a way that will hold the eruv around our people. Because this is literally tearing away people who love Israel, who commit, their lives to its well-being, and find a solution. Well, I'm sure all of you were aware, and many of you gave your input. Sharansky, being the person he is, didn't just have the ability to talk to people, but to really hear. And he came up with something that was extraordinary. And when he came to New York to first test what he had created in hearing all the different things, we sat, as we do with a group of rabbis at the Jewish Federations of North America. Jerry Silverman convenes leaders of the North American movements regularly to talk. And we met with Sharansky, and what was extraordinary is everybody was unhappy. It was a great moment. It was a great success. Because as Sharansky finished his presentation, you looked around, you saw everyone was unhappy. And we knew that he had succeeded. Because nobody was walking out thinking we got everything we needed. We did this thing that the Jewish tradition teaches, but we rarely practice, called we had a little compromise. His solution was not what I dreamt of. It wasn't what anyone dreamt of. But it was a dream for the unity of the Jewish people in our diversity. That's where there's a real takeaway here. And so what happened? You know that, again, everybody who heard it said, well, it's the most unlikely thing to ever bring into reality. How is there going to be a second part of the Kotel which will be at the same level, the same size? And on one side, it'll be egalitarian. So you could have the experience of being I always think about father and daughter from Nahariya coming for their trip to Jerusalem and coming to the Kotel, and again, not being particularly observant, but coming and saying, here is the Kotel. And they're standing there going, which way do we go? Do we go to the traditional side? Looks like beautiful davening going over there, women together, men together. Or over here, there are actually men and women together doing their ritual experience. And they would have a choice. And again, it would be literally a fork that is of equal access. And then we would have different oversight for not just the egalitarian side and the traditional side, to bring some new voices in. So we keep a sense of the wider eruv around the decision-making, what happens in the plaza, because this belongs to the Jewish people. Well, it turned out about 6 weeks ago, it looked like the Sharansky proposals were getting shelved, if not shredded, because there was a new process. The new cabinet secretary, Avichai Mendelblit, was asked by the prime minister to really put together the plan. And it looked like the plan was going to be undermined. I had a chance to meet with Avichai Mendelblit. He met with members and leaders of all the movements and beyond. Very thoughtful gentleman. And then I had a chance to meet with the prime minister, with Natan Sharansky, about 6 weeks ago. And first of all, I don't know where everyone stands on the political spectrum, but on some of these things, I hope we stand on common ground. I publicly have said that the prime minister has exercised extraordinary leadership and courage, even to ask Sharansky to do what he did. But my question to the prime minister was the same question that Natan Sharansky brought, which is, are you really, really committed to this? Because it's going to take every bit of your strength to make any of this happen, let alone all of it happen. And there are a lot of things, including what the cabinet secretary was doing, that looked like it was, as we say in football, an end run, like going around. And the prime minister, you know, it was pretty straight ahead. And the simple and direct response was, I am committed. And you know, it's complicated. I said, it is complicated. What isn't? And yes, the Jordanians, and yes, the Waqf, and believe me, all those sensitive places that are touched, and the archaeologists. But if you're committed and you're willing to take a lot of heat, and there's no way this is going forward without a lot of heat, we'll get there. And some of it we can do today. You saw the news story yesterday that Sharansky said within a few weeks the new and final plan will be out. So it's likely to be out before Rosh Hashanah. Our people are actually talking about it, and they're thinking about it. And some people are talking about it as partisan. Some people are thinking about it as a chance for there to be, as Sharansky always says, one wall for one people. And why have one wall for one people? Because it's a symbol of what could then happen in the wider society, the sense of pluralism. What we do every day in our North American and diaspora communities is unimaginable on an everyday basis in Israel. So what happens in the Kotel isn't about the Kotel alone. I hope it's about how we have the freedom to marry, and new freedoms in divorce, new freedoms in building congregations, new freedom in thinking about what it means to be Jewish in the Jewish state. And it means a rethinking of some of the structures of power and some of the entanglement of religion and state. So there's a lot to talk about on the upcoming Yamim Noraim, and I imagine that there'll be more than a few sermons about the Kotel. For me, the Kotel is about the Kotel, and it's about the everything. To me, it's about the eruv. To me, it's about the many authentic ways we have to live deep, committed Jewish lives. And it is essential that the state of Israel be one of the places, if not the shining example of a place where that eruv is drawn widely, and it includes those who have secular and cultural expressions of Jewishness. There's so much that's growing right now in Israel. When you go, and all of you go regularly, you go to the Midrashah at Or Anim, and you see Nigun Halev, a group of secular Israelis that want not just to learn, have a kind of bar mitzvah experience, they want to actually do something on Friday night that looks, feels, and is a whole lot like a Kabbalat Shabbat service. If you see what's happening in Tel Aviv, Beit Tfilah Yisraeli, it's outside in the port, and there are, kids eating ice cream and people sipping aroma coffee with their dogs, and all of a sudden there's this music and there's this sense of welcome that just draws them in. There's stuff that's growing so beautifully. So that we need in the state of Israel for there to be as much flourishing as there can be anywhere else in the diaspora, and more so. So it's not an anti-sermon. Again, I know that's how some people will see it. You can't give a sermon about this on the high holidays. Friends, we'll talk more in the afternoon about how we talk about Israel. But if we can't talk to our people about this kind of pluralism, this kind of the question of tolerance, the question of multiple pathways, the question of how do we lift up our people and not just lift up one part of our people. And yes, it has to do with the chief rabbis. Again, I don't wish any of our chief rabbis ill. They should all live and be well and live lives of integrity and lead with every ounce of their strength, but I believe there should not be a chief rabbinate. Didn't say that for applause, but thank you for that. What I'm most proud of is, and again, this is a sermon that we don't need to give because we gave it before the election of the chief rabbis. I had a chance to meet with one half of the Israeli cabinet. They didn't, want to meet me. They wanted to meet the leader of the reform movement, and they wanted to understand where some of the disconnect was. And one of the things I shared with them is I asked them if they knew who Rabbi Shmuel Eliyahu was. And I got to tell you, almost to a person, the Israeli cabinet ministers had not really heard the name other than a few who had actually promoted his candidacy. Well, you know who won the chief Sephardic post, and it wasn't Rabbi Shmuel Eliyahu, who's been the chief rabbi of Tzfat. And I tell you this because it's going to set up this afternoon. Rabbi Shmuel Eliyahu has spent years and years speaking freely about people in the state of Israel who are Arabs. And he said some of the most harsh and hateful things about them, and he is paid a salary by the state of Israel. And remember, and I said to the cabinet ministers, I said, do you want someone who speaks so harshly at a moment when the prime minister, by the way, after the prime minister met with me and with Natan Sharansky, he had to cut the meeting short. He said, I have another meeting. So, you don't ever take that personally. And he said, I'm meeting with John Kerry. So I got to leave early. So I said, I cede all my time to the good former senator from Massachusetts. And so how is it that there's going to be a meeting with John Kerry if the potential chief rabbi is someone who, again, we'll talk about how we view two states, how we view some of the bigger issues around reconciliation. But how do I say to heads of state, including our own president, were he to get on a plane again, they land in Tel Aviv, there's the prime minister, there's the president, there's the chief Sephardic rabbi and the chief Ashkenazi rabbi. And the first hands that are put out would be the hand of somebody who expresses, again, he may say that he expresses the Jewish tradition, but I would debate that all day long and all night long. And so what we do and how we have a voice in some of these critical issues is obviously well known because we have activists throughout this room and throughout this community. But we actually have to exercise our voice. Our voices can be like the shofar, things that will awaken and challenge and connect, and also signal danger when danger is in fact before us. So I know that there's not a lot of time for some Q&A. I want to actually conclude my remarks with the frame that I began with, and want to also hope that we get a chance for the second session to get into more textual frames. But I really wanted in this opening keynote to really give some of the bigger arcs and to talk about some of the things that I think are the most remarkable opportunities we will see if we can be like Koch and tell the truth about where we are and learn from the things that we may think we already understand, like the dynamics of who's a part and who's not, and to think differently about the structures and the modalities of our Jewish community, to think about where we draw the circle, who's in that circle, who's outside that circle. And most importantly, I want to just lift up 3 words that we began with from our liturgy. Hayom Harat Olam. Today, not in a couple years when we're maybe in a different place and maybe we lose the opportunity, but today is the moment. And that today is literally this Tuesday. It'll also be, the first day of Tishrei. Hayom. It is for this moment, for us to harat, to reconceptualize, reimagine, rethink, reboot, restructure, renovate, however you want to use the R words, so that what we do individually and what we do collectively will be le'olam, will be for not just for a few more moments or a few more years, but for the rest of time. Thank you.
We have 5 minutes for questions. Questions are questions. They actually are not paragraphs or statements. They are succinct and they end up with a question mark. And the first one is our San Antonian Thousand Oaks colleague, Rick Spiegel.
Thank you very much for a wonderful speaking today. It's just inspiring just to listen to you. My only question is, as I was listening and thinking it was so wonderful, when you went to the end and talked about the hotel, I found myself thinking, my people are happy to be at the hotel. They really aren't so absorbed in whether you can event here, whether here. They would rather go to the section when we do the mitzvah there. There is the section that you can go to Robinson's Arch and do that. So they're not so concerned with that aspect of it. Would you just, I want you to do things. What else would you speak about for the high holidays?
Is that your question? Is that your question?
Yes. My question is that the topic or are there others?
Yeah, there are many more, and I'm hoping you'll stick around after lunch when I get another chance to talk about it. Can we just take a few questions? I'm happy to respond to that, but I know we have limited time, so let me get a few questions and see if I can weave some kind of response. Please.
I have a congregation up in the foothills area, Sunland Tahanga area, which you might say, oh gosh, I didn't know there were Jews up there. Well, they do exist. And what's happening is I'm bringing them out from the woodwork, half Jews. Oh, I am a Jew, but I never had an education, and so on. So my model of the congregation is we meet every Thursday night for classes. And I'm teaching them from the bottom up about the holidays, about Hebrew, about the prayers, and so on. And we're really building from the building blocks of community. Anyway, I just wanted to say this is the wave of the future. And I just want to say that I got so much from what you said, because sometimes I feel so incredibly isolated. And what am I doing? Am I sitting in the room here?
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you. I love a question that has its own good answer. So thank you for the question and a good answer, that you're already doing things that already sees new modalities. Wonderful. So just a couple more, and then I'll make literally a sentence or two. Yeah.
What makes you confident that Netanyahu really cares about the way you?
Okay, good question. Yes. No, I'm going to circle back. No, it's a great question. Let me circle back because I think it connects to the question of who really is even going to care about this issue. If people are already very comfortable at the Kotel, then you go off on a whole long thing here. The political realities are part of it. Yes.
Were 20s and 30s ever really seriously affiliated?
So let me start with that, because actually the Torah is not my Torah. It's people like Robert Wuthnow, who is the sociologist at Princeton, who's written literally whole research about this generation. What he would say is, well, they're not exactly the folks who run first and foremost, but what he would say about the whole cohort is that period of time is much longer. It used to be that if people were to partner, they partnered earlier. If they were going to have children, they did so earlier. So what we're talking about is a giant swath of time, sometimes as much as 20 plus years. So if someone or a couple or a young family is, kind of getting very, very acclimated to what it's like to be outside those walls. The idea of being inside is absolutely alien. So I think there is something different, and yes, I think we need to pay attention. I think we're all, we had more time to talk about some of those things. So the two questions about the Kotel. First, I actually think that, God bless people who have not just the powerful experiences, but the comfort level at the Kotel. One of the things I would say in our conversations with ultra-Orthodox colleagues about the Kotel is whatever we come up with has to make sure that there are ways for everyone within our circle to find their way to the Kotel and be a part of it. So if we had a Kotel that was only an egalitarian Kotel, I'd be just as hot and bothered right now to make sure that everyone else within our big Eruv had the ability to pray and to experience. So to me, it's actually a sermon about who we are and how we're responsible one for the other. It's not about Herodian walls. By the way, there's an amazing text in Rosh Hashanah which talks about walking by shaky walls. And I think there's a lot of opportunity to drush that, because one of the things that's obviously problematic is the wall of separation. That's the shakiest wall of all right now in the Jewish state. So I actually think that the sermon is a Klal Yisrael sermon. It's a unity of the Jewish people. It's an affirmation of many pathways for Jewish life. So it may be that we're more comfortable on the traditional side, or we think that we're fine, but the great majority of Jews in the world would not define their practice. And when, I don't know, I used to try and take groups, I started out in the rabbinate, to pray at, Kabbalat Shabbat at the Kotel. I haven't done that in, a very long time. There are many more comfortable places. We want to make that place a symbol of Jewish unity and Jewish respect and the pluralism that we need. And to the question about whether Prime Minister Netanyahu meant what he said, try to, who is it? Some great person in the Nixon cabinet said, trust but verified. I think that, goodwill is important, but I think what we have and what the Prime Minister did, because remember, he didn't have to appoint Natan Sharansky to begin with. Iran had been pretty much the focal point. He understood that getting this right is about keeping the great majority of the Jews in the world a part of the enterprise known as the Jewish state. So I think he gets loud and clear, and I think that's the main motivation for him, not just his experience in North America and understanding some of the reality of our lives. I think he understands it's a strategic imperative that this not be one of those big, divisive, blocks that gets put between Israel and North America. So I think he has a lot of self-interest to build upon. I also think he's facing, quite a lot of pressure in his government on everything, not just on the potential for some resolution with the Palestinians, which we'll talk, I hope, more about this afternoon. So again, leadership is about oftentimes having the courage of our convictions. It also is paying attention and seeing, the larger arcs of history. And I would say that, I hope that Prime Minister Netanyahu will continue to see clearly what this issue means to our communities, what it means to the Jewish people, past, present, and future, and for that he will find the strength to do what will be hard because of the strength that he will experience from all of us and for many throughout North America and the Tfutzot all around the world. So let me just say thank you for this session. We'll have time to learn. I know there'll be different announcements, and I look forward to another session this afternoon.